Lauren Hayes had never been the type to make noise. For 15 years, she built her legacy in quiet precision, designing patient data algorithms that became the unseen backbone of healthcare networks nationwide. In the company's San Diego headquarters, her name wasn't splashed on press releases, but her work was woven into the success of every major project. Then came the morning that rewrote her story. Ethan Cole, 28, freshly minted COO and conveniently the CEO's nephew, strode into her office with the smugness of someone who believed titles could buy respect. The words were quick and cold. Her role was being eliminated to cut costs. A check slid across the desk, $3,950, just shy of the $4,000 that would have triggered a bigger payout. And then, almost as an afterthought, the sting of a remark about long-timers milking the budget. Lauren didn't flinch. Her calm smile said nothing, but it meant everything. 'Cause she remembered something Ethan didn't know, something buried deep in a founder-era contract, waiting for the right moment to surface. What Ethan thought was the end of her chapter was, in fact, the opening line of his undoing. Lauren had spent years watching a subtle shift happen within the company's walls. When she first joined, fresh out of grad school, the culture had been built on collaboration and mutual respect. Senior engineers were mentors, not relics. Knowledge was passed down like a craft, carefully honed over years. But in the last decade, something had changed. Younger hires, many barely out of their 20s, carried an unspoken belief that anything older than their own career span was outdated. They saw her expertise as little more than a relic of another era, a collection of obsolete methods clinging stubbornly to relevance. She didn't fault them entirely. The tech world thrived on speed and novelty. But what they didn't understand was that her algorithms weren't relics at all. They were the backbone of the company's most profitable products. Without them, the company's systems would falter within weeks. And Lauren had ensured, quietly and methodically, that certain pieces of her work were woven so deeply into the company's infrastructure that removing them would require a complete rebuild. It was during those early, scrappy years that the founder had introduced the clause. She could still recall his words, "Protect the people who build the foundation. Without them, the house falls." It was written in careful legal language. If any key engineer's monthly pay ever fell below $4,000, every piece of intellectual property they had created under the company's roof would revert to their personal ownership. At the time, it felt like a symbolic gesture of loyalty. Now it felt like a loaded weapon Ethan had unknowingly handed to her. Lauren still had the original document, thick paper, crisp edges, ink signatures, and a raised seal pressed into the corner. It was stored in a fireproof box at home, along with a handful of personal mementos she considered irreplaceable. That contract had been a piece of history, but now it was something else, leverage. When Ethan had smugly handed her the check for $3,950, he thought he was humiliating her. In reality, he had triggered the exact condition that transferred years of her innovations, designs, and code into her sole possession. He didn't know it, the board didn't know it, and most importantly, the product team didn't know it. She left the office without protest, her face unreadable, her steps unhurried. People assumed her silence was resignation. In truth, it was calculation. Every move she made from this moment forward would be deliberate. She wasn't thinking about revenge, not yet. She was thinking about value, about timing, and about how to turn this unexpected shift into an advantage she alone could wield. Outside the building, as the California sun caught the edge of her car's windshield, Lauren felt the familiar stir of strategy rising within her. She had just been handed a legal and technical ace, and she had no intention of wasting it. The game had changed. And she wasn't the one at risk anymore. Lauren moved with precision, each step calculated and quiet. She didn't need to announce her intentions. The less noise she made now, the more effective her eventual strike would be. The first call she placed was to Maya Chen, an intellectual property attorney she hadn't spoken to in years. Their last collaboration had been during a grueling patent infringement case 7 years ago, one they had won with a combination of airtight evidence and sheer persistence. Lauren remembered Maya not just as a lawyer but as someone who understood the long game. When Lauren laid out the situation, Maya didn't hesitate. She asked a few clarifying questions, then asked Lauren to send her a scanned copy of the original contract. Within the hour, Maya had combed through it, cross-referenced the applicable statutes, and called her back with confirmation. Clause was still valid, untouched by any subsequent company policy changes. And because Ethan had now reduced Lauren's salary to $3,950, the 30-day countdown had begun. When it ended, full ownership of her data analytics software, including the proprietary algorithms, frameworks, and predictive models, would legally revert to her. No negotiation. No loopholes. Lauren listened to Maya's words with the kind of calm only experience could bring. She didn't need to celebrate, she already knew the power in her hands. The software wasn't just another product in the company's lineup, it was the engine that drove their most lucrative contracts. Losing it would be like pulling the heart from a body. While this quiet shift in ownership was set in motion, Ethan was doing exactly what Lauren expected him to do, bragging. His LinkedIn post went live less than a week after her departure. He called it a bold cost-saving initiative, claiming it would save the company $200,000 annually. He celebrated his decision to bring in younger, more dynamic talent and refresh outdated workflows. Comments were full of back-patting, congratulatory messages, and blind enthusiasm from people who had no idea of the trap he had just sprung for himself. Lauren found it almost amusing. People always assumed savings were synonymous with smart business. But she knew better. She had seen savings destroy entire product pipelines when experienced staff were replaced by those still learning the basics. What Ethan called efficiency was, in truth, dismantling the very foundation of the company's value. From her home office, Lauren began quietly organizing her assets. She reviewed the code repositories she had access to, ensuring her own private archives were complete and up-to-date. She compiled documentation of her authorship, version histories, technical notes, design sketches, all time-stamped and irrefutable. It wasn't about making a case later. It was about being ready the moment the clock ran out. She also started mapping possible futures. Should she license the software back to the company at a steep rate? Sell it to one of their competitors? Or perhaps launch her own venture, free from the narrow vision of people like Ethan? She didn't have to decide now. She simply had to prepare so that when the 30 days were over, every door was open to her. Ethan thought the game was over. Lauren knew it hadn't even begun. The most dangerous moves were always made in silence. And she was playing the quiet game better than anyone he had ever met. On the 30th day, the quiet countdown ended. Lauren didn't have to lift a finger. Maya had been tracking the deadline with the precision of a surgeon. That morning, the company's legal department received an official notice drafted in the cool, surgical language of corporate law. It stated, without flourish or ambiguity, that Lauren was now the sole legal owner of the core algorithm powering the company's flagship technology, a predictive data engine embedded in thousands of medical devices across the United States and beyond. The letter did more than announce ownership. It set terms. If the company wished to continue using the algorithm, they would need to sign a licensing agreement with an annual fee in the 8-figure range. There was also a demand for retroactive usage fees, covering the period since Lauren's salary had been reduced, plus interest penalties for any delays in payment. The numbers weren't arbitrary. Maya had calculated them against market value, existing contract revenues, and the strategic vulnerability of the company's medical technology division. Inside the company's headquarters, the impact was immediate and chaotic. Departments froze mid-project, unsure whether they could continue work without infringing on Lauren's rights. Project managers scrambled to assess which hospital systems, research labs, and military contracts depended on the algorithm. The realization hit hard. Virtually every unit they shipped relied on it. Without access, their contracts with both domestic hospitals and U.S. military suppliers would be in breach within weeks. First, Ethan brushed it off. When the legal notice reached his desk, he leaned back in his chair and laughed, calling it a petty revenge stunt to anyone who would listen. He told his inner circle the clause was irrelevant, outdated, and unenforceable. His confidence wasn't rooted in legal expertise but in arrogance. the belief that no former employee could truly corner him. That confidence evaporated the moment the chairman of the board summoned him. In the executive conference room, the atmosphere was different. No idle chatter, no forced smiles. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, a notarized letter from the company's original founder, dated years before Ethan's arrival, confirming the clause's intent and binding legal weight. The chairman's message was brief and cold. The company had been caught in a trap of its own making, and Ethan had led them into it. News of the legal dispute didn't stay contained for long. Within days, word spread across the medical technology sector. Industry blogs speculated on the fallout, analysts questioned the company's stability, and competitors quietly reached out to Lauren's network. Hospitals began asking for reassurances about product continuity. Government contacts started reviewing contingency plans. For a company whose reputation had been built on trust, reliability, and cutting-edge innovation, the damage was devastating. Investors grew restless. Clients grew skeptical. And in the middle of it all, Lauren remained silent, watching the ripples spread outward. She knew this was more than a business dispute. It was the moment when control shifted, and she was holding the center. The board moved quickly, too quickly for Ethan's comfort. A special meeting was called, not weeks from now, not even days, but within the next 24 hours. The stakes were too high, the potential losses too severe. And at the center of it all, they needed one person in the room, Lauren Hayes. She arrived on time, her presence composed yet unmistakably commanding. She didn't walk in with the swagger of someone seeking revenge, nor with the timidity of a former employee returning under duress. She walked in as the rightful owner of something the company couldn't survive without. Every eye in the room followed her as she took her seat across from the board, a polished leather folder resting lightly in her hands. When the chairman asked her to proceed, she opened the folder and slid a neatly printed agreement across the table. The terms were listed without theatrics, each line carefully calculated. An annual licensing fee in the 8-figure range, retroactive usage fees from the day her salary had been cut, compounded interest penalties for any late payments, and a final clause that struck a chord deeper than money, her name, invented by Lauren Hayes, to be displayed in all promotional, technical, and investor-facing materials. This was not just about ownership. It was about history being corrected in plain sight. There was a silence in the room as the directors read the document. Some frowned, some leaned back in resignation, and others simply kept their expressions neutral. They all knew the truth, they had no alternative. Without the algorithm, the company's operations would grind to a halt, contracts would dissolve, and their market standing would plummet beyond recovery. One by one they signed. The sound of each pen scratching paper was both reluctant and inevitable. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, his expression tight, his jaw set. He was the last to receive the document. For a moment, he hesitated, scanning the terms as if searching for a loophole that wasn't there. When he finally took the pen, his hand betrayed him with a faint tremor. The signature that followed was slow, deliberate, and painfully final. Lauren did not smile. She did not lean back in satisfaction or meet Ethan's gaze with triumph. Instead, she simply closed her folder, slid the signed copy into it, and rose from her chair. In her mind, this wasn't about humiliating Ethan. It wasn't even about the money, though the terms were considerable. It was about principle, the recognition that her work had value, and that value deserved to be acknowledged, not buried beneath corporate politics and personal ego. As she left the boardroom, the air felt different. She had shifted the balance of power not through aggression, but through patience, preparation, and the unshakable certainty that the truth was on her side. In the silence that followed her departure, the board members sat with the weight of the agreement they had just signed, knowing the company's future now rested in the hands of the very person they had once tried to discard. Lauren stepped out of the boardroom without so much as a backward glance. The heavy door closed behind her, sealing off the tension, the whispered exchanges, and the barely contained frustration of those still inside. Her pace was steady, unhurried, not the stride of someone escaping a battlefield, but of someone who had already won before the first move was made. She knew she would never set foot in that company again. Corridors, the offices, the sterile meeting rooms, All of it belonged to a chapter she had already finished writing. And yet, in a way, the company would never truly be free of her. Every time they sold a device, every time they demonstrated their technology, every time an investor presentation mentioned their core algorithm, they would be paying for the privilege to use what she had created. Her name would be there, printed and spoken, a quiet reminder of who had truly built their foundation. It was a victory without gloating, without applause. She felt no need to stand on a podium or issue a public statement. The terms of the agreement were more powerful than any press release. They were an unshakable reality, enforced by law and backed by the simple truth of her authorship. Lauren understood something many in her position would have missed, that vindication does not always require humiliation of the other party. Sometimes the most profound win is ensuring that your worth is acknowledged and compensated, without letting bitterness corrode the satisfaction. Later, in her own thoughts, she would reflect on how easy it could have been to let anger dictate her moves. She could have fought to ruin them, to dismantle their reputation entirely. But she had chosen differently. Her strategy had been clear: protect her rights, secure her future, and set a precedent that could not be ignored. She had played the long game, and the outcome spoke for itself. She thought about the lessons that had carried her to this point. Always understand the contracts you sign, especially the clauses that define ownership and usage rights. Always know where your legal footing lies before taking a step. Never let emotions make the decisions when you are treated unfairly. Emotions can cloud judgment, but precision wins battles. And above all, trust in the fact that true value does not need to shout. Can stand quietly in the background, allowing results to tell the story. As she reached the lobby, sunlight spilled through the tall glass doors. She stepped outside, the crisp air washing over her like a reset. In her hand, she held the signed agreement, a simple sheaf of papers that, to anyone else, might look unremarkable. To her, it was proof of a principle she would carry for the rest of her life. She walked forward into the brightness, her path clear, her pace unwavering, her quiet victory complete.